Gentlefolk of the internet, welcome to tonight's historical non-adventure. Tonight we tiptoe into the foggy fields and suspicious minds of Anglo Saxon England as you try to make sense of the very loud, very bearded people everyone calls Vikings. It's early morning, too early, and it's damp again, the kind of damp that crawls into your boots before you even get them on. You stir in your straw-stuffed palate, half dreaming of cheese and half wondering why the air feels heavy with dread. Then you hear it low echoing like someone trying to summon a god with a hollowed-out tree trunk. A horn. Far off, but not that far. You rub your eyes. Your neighbors are already murmuring. That's never a good sign. No one really knows where the Vikings come from. North, obviously. But north covers a lot of ground, and the maps in your village are mostly just squiggly lines and hopeful guesses. Some say they're from a land of ice and wolves, and people who think fish should be eaten cold. Others claim they're devils sent by God to test your sin levels. One woman is convinced they ride whales. Historians still argue whether the average Anglo Saxon peasant had a distinct concept of Norway or just lumped everything colder than Wessex into one terrifying blur. You throw on your cloak. It smells like wet goat, but so does everything. At the communal fire pit, someone is muttering a prayer, not quite Latin, not quite comforting. You catch the word drakar, which might mean dragon ship, or my cousin saw one and fainted. Either way, it's not reassuring. Children are being quietly told to stay close. Elders are debating again whether burying the silver under the floorboards works, or if that just makes your floor very shiny and tempting. The truth is, no one really has a system for this. You're not exactly a military power. You're more of a hope they don't notice us kind of village. The horn sounds again, closer now. You sigh and eat a piece of cold oat cake. This is not the breakfast you wanted. One of the elders who insists he met a Viking once and lived to complain about it starts talking. He says the Vikings smell like salt and goat leather, and their hair is suspiciously clean for people who don't seem to own roofs. He once saw one eat an entire trout without blinking. This apparently is what passes for tactical intelligence. Some say they're here for gold, some say for slaves. Others think they just get bored and want to ruin someone's Tuesday. But most agree they always show up when the barley is half harvested, the monks are asleep, and the weather is just nice enough to make running away feel like an inconvenience. You help your neighbor cover the sheep with a tarp, not because it'll help, but because it's something to do. The sheep look unimpressed. Still, it's not always bad news. Last time the Vikings came, they got lost, raided the wrong village, and were chased off by a swarm of bees. You're holding on to that story like it's a sacred text. If bees can beat Vikings, maybe so can muddy ditches and prayers said sideways. And anyway, it's not like anyone's panicking. Not really. Not yet. A man from the next village over walks in soaked and breathless. He says he saw ships, real ones, with carved figureheads and striped sails, and men who laughed too loudly for this hour of morning. One of them waved. You sip weak ale and try to look unimpressed. Inside your stomach does something uncertain. The sun is rising now slowly, like it's reluctant to see what happens next. You stretch, listen to more muttering, and prepare yourself for the possibility of either battle hiding in the pig shed, or if you're lucky, a false alarm. Because in Anglo-Saxon England, you're never quite sure if the next horn blast means invasion, or just some idiot testing out his cousin's new trumpet. The horns stop around midday, which is worse, really. You'd rather the noise than the silence that follows, the kind of silence that makes even the cows shift uneasily and the chickens pause mid-scratch. You glance toward the river. Still nothing visible, but you swear the reeds moved in a way that felt judgmental. Then someone comes running from the fields. They landed, he shouts, nearly colliding with your aunt's laundry line, near the marsh road. Didn't even knock. You think that's a strange way to describe an invasion, but he's right. There's something about the way Vikings arrive that feels especially rude. No warning, no formal letter, no dear villagers. We shall be pillaging your granary sometime between second breakfast and dusk. Just long ships sliding up the river like they're on holiday and beaching themselves with the enthusiasm of a drunk goose. You and the other villagers gather in a knot behind the hedgerow. It's not the best defense, but it makes you feel like you're doing something. Someone hands you a pitchfork. You're not sure what it's for. Symbolism, maybe? Down by the water, you finally see them. The longship is longer than any house you've ever seen. Its sail hangs limp in the still air, but its dragon-shaped prow seems to leer at you all the same. A few figures hop over the side as casually as if they were unloading turnips. They stretch, yawn, scratch themselves. One of them pulls a leg of something out of his belt, starts chewing. No one's shouting, no one's charging. It's honestly disconcerting. They don't look very angry, someone whispers. No worse, someone else replies. They look organized, and they do. They wear layers of wool and leather, with iron bits stitched on in places that suggest they've thought about elbows in ways you never have. Their helmets, to your disappointment, do not have horns, just rounded iron caps with nose guards, as if protecting the most punchable part of the face is a cultural priority. There's a woman with them, tall, carrying a sack that probably used to belong to someone you know. She has a small axe. She's also wearing pants, which causes quite a stir in the hedgerow. Are they camping, you ask? They've started building a fire, one of the village elders huffs. They'll be gone by morning. They never stay long, too smelly. But you're not so sure. These Vikings seem methodical. They've set up a little cookpot. One of them is carving a spoon. Another's feeding a dog. Not looting, not yelling, just making themselves at home like they've been invited to a particularly muddy garden party. You shift your pitchfork. It still feels more decorative than useful. Behind you, someone proposes a plan: approach them off rail and see what happens. This is countered with a strongly worded reminder that the last person who did that ended up missing 3 toes and his dignity. Historians still argue whether most Anglo Saxon communities tried to fight, negotiate, or just hide in barns and hope the weather turned. Today, your village seems to be trying all 3 at once. The blacksmith is hammering something very loudly in case that intimidates anyone. The vicar is praying in Latin with increasing urgency, and your cousin Edgar is halfway up a tree holding a goose. The Viking dog trots toward your side of the river. It's friendly. This causes immediate chaos, as half the village interprets this as a harbinger of doom, and the other half wants to pet it. You do neither. You just stare at the longship and wonder what sort of people arrive uninvited with cooking supplies, dogs, and decorative boat dragons. Later, as evening sets in, the fire down by the river glows softly. No one's dead. Yet. The visitors haven't stolen anything obvious, though old Nan claims they took her spoon. It turns out it was in her apron. The Vikings eat in shifts, speak in a language that sounds like someone gargling pebbles, and laugh in bursts like thunderclaps. You return to your house, lock the door, realize they probably don't care about doors. As you lie down, you imagine them curled up in their ship, lulled to sleep by the river's slow current and the absolute confidence that no one will challenge them in the dark. They don't knock. They don't ask. They just show up. And for now, at least, they're not leaving. Morning arrives with suspicious cheerfulness. Birds are chirping. The sun makes a half-hearted effort to shine. And the Vikings are still here. You step outside and see that someone, possibly Edgar, has drawn a crude Viking "Go Home" sign and propped it near the hedgerow. The Vikings naturally have not noticed. At the village well, gossip flows even faster than the water. The big question today: what are these people really? They worship trees, someone whispers. No, they marry their swords, says another. My uncle swears they eat their dead ads, a third. The truth, of course, is harder to pin down. Historians still argue whether Anglo-Saxon villagers had any consistent understanding of Norse religion. You know the name Odin, but mostly because someone painted it on a goat last winter. Thor sounds like the kind of man who'd arm wrestle a thunderstorm, and Loki's the one you blame when your cart breaks a wheel. Around the fire pit, the elders debate theology. Again, they don't have churches, one mutters, scandalized, just rocks and shouting. You nod solemnly, as if this is both terrifying and impolite. Word spreads that one of the younger Vikings, barely more than a boy, helped rescue a sheep that got tangled in a fence. This causes further confusion. You were told they were monsters. Monsters don't gently untangle livestock. They certainly don't apologize afterward in broken Old English. More confusing still, their clothes. You'd assumed Vikings wore blood-stained armor or nothing but fur and menace. But the truth is well layered. Wool tunics, cloaks fastened with brooches, bits of jewelry that gleam in the sun. One man wears a striped belt with such unapologetic confidence that you start to question your own fashion choices. And the beards, majestic, braided, clearly intentional. Not the accidental face moss of your average villager. You spot a comb hanging from one warrior's belt, ivory etched with swirling designs. Why would someone invading your home? Groom, you ask aloud. No one has an answer. Someone tries to talk to them. A merchant, naturally. He pantomimes trade. Points to a barrel of dried fish. A Viking points to his necklace in return. Somehow they reach a deal. The necklace is made of glass beads in impossible colors, red, green, cobalt blue. You wonder where they came from. Some say the Norsemen have been everywhere: Ireland, Francia, maybe even Byzantium. The idea that these loud people have seen more of the world than your entire village combined is unsettling. Later, you sit under the shade of a tree and overhear children debating whether the Vikings can talk to birds. One swears she saw one whispering to a raven. Another says that's nonsense, they talk to wolves. Someone else claims they turn into wolves during winter. You smile, but quietly, because the truth is, you don't know what's real. These are people from over the horizon. They arrive with stories, strange gods, polished metalwork, and manners that swing wildly between helpful and horrifying. You know they eat loudly. That part's definitely true. The mead hall hasn't been this loud since the last wedding, and even that ended in 3 sprained ankles and someone marrying a chicken by accident. In the evening, you find yourself watching the firelight flicker off their arm rings and braided hair. You wonder if they think of you as barbarians, too muddy, reclusive, afraid of wind. One of them offers you roasted fish. You accept it. You both chew in silence. Not exactly a cultural exchange, but it's something. As you walk back to your cottage, you find yourself puzzling over it all. The gods, the jewelry, the laugh that sounds like a bear falling down a hill, the rumor that one of them wrote poetry about onions, the strange combination of violence and embroidery. You lie awake for a while, listening to the soft creak of wood and distant Norse laughter. You're still not sure what to think of them, but you're beginning to realize they might not know what to think of you either. By now, the Vikings have been in your village for 3 days, which is about 2.5 days longer than anyone is comfortable with. They've moved from sleeping on their ships to lounging around the commons like it's a temporary Airbnb. Their longship sits idle on the riverbank, tethered with a thick rope tied to a boulder like a very large pet that may or may not bite. The village has split into camps. Not fighting camps, this isn't that kind of story, just camps of opinion. One group says they're traitors, another insists they're spies, a third claims they're cursed by the gods to wander endlessly until they find the world's most beautiful soup. You are in a quieter camp, the suspiciously polite observers. This morning at the market, a Viking woman offers you something wrapped in cloth. It's a cloak pin, intricate and heavy, shaped like 2 coiled serpents. You've never seen anything like it. You admire the smooth metal, the stamped pattern, the way it catches the light, and then you remember your cousin's church was burned down last spring. You blink. Is this stolen, you ask gently? She shrugs. Makes a noise that might mean maybe or might mean, why do you care, it's pretty. You hand it back. Later you see that same cloak pin on the shoulder of the local reeve. He's pretending it's been in the family for generations. Everyone pretends along with him. Because here's the thing, the longer the Vikings stay, the more their stuff quietly slips into your lives. Their beads appear on your neighbor's wrist. Their axes get admired by blacksmiths. Their vocabulary starts to leak into conversation, just a word here or there like husband or egg or law. Historians still argue whether this linguistic blend was gradual or just happened overnight when everyone got tired of translating. At the mead hall, someone is trading smoked eels for carved bone combs. You can't tell who's getting the better deal, but everyone seems satisfied. It's unsettling. One child runs by swinging a wooden sword and yelling something that sounds vaguely Norse. His grandmother swats at him with a spoon and calls him Little Ragnar. The name sticks. You meanwhile are watching people act like this is normal, but it isn't. It can't be. Can it? You sit beside the river that evening, staring at the longship. Its carvings are strange to your eyes. Knots and beasts and interlaced patterns that look like someone turned a headache into art. You wonder who carved them. You wonder what they meant. A Viking man sits beside you, offers you dried fish. You sigh, accept it, chew slowly. He points to the sky, says something in his language, something about stars, you guess. Then he makes a loud snorting noise that might be laughter, or indigestion, or both. You try to imagine where this man came from, what his home looks like. What he thinks of you with your muddy boots, woolen tunic, and deep mistrust of enthusiasm. Does he think this place is small, boring, endearing? Does he look at your sheep and think what strange, quiet people always burying things and whispering about weather? You watch the river, the ship, the skimminee. You wonder if the pin from earlier really came from a church, if it matters. If all of this is just how history happens awkwardly, unevenly, one borrowed trinket at a time. That night a priest gives a very long sermon about moral rot and foreign influence. Half the village sleeps through it. The other half pretends to nod thoughtfully while stealing glances at the Viking combs tucked into their belts. You head home and think about spoons, specifically how someone could arrive uninvited, eat your fish, borrow your spoons, and somehow convince half your neighbors that they're actually doing you a favor. It's a strange world, and it's only getting stranger. You wake up to laughter, not village laughter, Viking laughter, that deep bellowing sort that sounds like someone just told a joke about a chicken, a monk, and an axe, and no one's quite sure if it's funny or terrifying. The longship is still there, of course, but it's become more of a landmark now. Children are playing tag around its hull. Someone tied ribbons to the prow yesterday. No one asked permission. And the Vikings. They're doing laundry. You stare, mildly offended. Vikings aren't supposed to do laundry. They're supposed to shout and raid and vanish. But here they are, wringing out tunics, hanging socks on branches, arguing over whose linen shirt is whose. One of them waves at you. You wave back automatically. This is the part no one talks about, when the invaders stop invading and just start being neighbors. At the market you hear one of the Norsemen, Harold maybe, or possibly Sven, they all seem to be named Harold or Sven, bargaining over cheese. In perfectly decent Old English, the cheese is terrible, but the haggling is impressive. By now some of them have moved into abandoned cottages, temporarily they say. But the windows have curtains now. One has flower pots. That's not the act of someone planning to leave. Your uncle is particularly upset about this. They're settling, he hisses, as if it's a contagious disease. Next thing you know, they'll want to join the village council and organize the harvest dance. Too late. One of them already did. His suggestion to replace the traditional dance with a drinking contest was not well received, but it got people talking. And the thing is, they're not bad at village life. They help mend fences. They build things, actual straight fences, which is more than your cousin ever managed. One of them fixed the mill wheel. Another started baking. Baking, a Viking baker. You bite into one of his oat cakes and hate how much you like it. At night, the mead hall is louder than usual. Not because of fighting well, not much fighting, but because of singing. Old songs, new songs, songs that involve too many verses and not enough melody. You sit by the fire and watch as the lines blur. The Norsemen tell stories of frost giants and sea serpents. You respond with tales of talking horses and saints who turned into badgers. Nobody wins, but everyone claps. You're not sure when it happened exactly, when them became us. But it's there in the small things. A borrowed axe, a shared laugh, a child learning both words for bread. Historians still argue whether this slow Viking integration was strategic or accidental, whether they planned to blend in or if they simply got distracted by warm hearths and bad ale. Either way, it's working. Mostly. Some people still grumble. The Reeve keeps a list of suspicious activities, which includes braiding hair too confidently and smiling while sharpening things. You once caught a Viking and a Saxon arguing about the best kind of butter churn. They ended up agreeing and starting a joint butter enterprise. It's very successful. The village now refers to them as the Butter Lords, and no one is quite sure whether to be impressed or concerned. Tonight you walk past the longship and notice a carved wooden bird perched on its bow, new. Someone added it recently. Maybe as a sign of good luck, or maybe as a silent declaration we're not leaving. This is home now. You stare at it for a long while. Then you go home, eat your Viking oatcake, and listen to the faint sounds of Norse snoring echoing across the village square. Somehow you've gone from preparing for battle to wondering if that very tall Viking is single. Strange days, stranger dreams. It's been weeks now. The longship, once so fearsome, now mostly serves as a bench. Children climb on it. Cats nap under it. Someone tied a clothesline between the dragon prow and a tree. There's a Viking helmet hanging from the rigging like a wind chime. You barely notice anymore. What you do notice, though, is how everything feels. A little different. You're sitting outside shelling peas when the new priest passes by. Not your old priest, he left in a hurry once the Vikings arrived and started asking questions about monastery floor plans. This one's younger, softer spoken, and oddly fluent in Norse. He stops to chat about turnip stew. A Viking walks past, nods politely, and offers him a smoked fish. They discuss theology for 20 minutes. Nobody gets stabbed. You blink slowly. Later that day, the Reeve calls a meeting. The villagers gather under the big tree. A few Vikings come too, bringing their own stools. One even brings snacks. The Reeve clears his throat. So he says, "We need to talk about the winter grain stores. And also, the goats." You glance around. This is new. Not the goats, they've always been trouble, but the way the Vikings lean in, interested. One of them has a notebook, a real one, made of birch bark and string. He starts listing goat names like he's been here for years. There's a pause. Then old Nan, who once tried to hit a Viking with a broom, mutters, "Well, if they're going to help with the goats." And just like that, the meeting continues. You don't realize how strange this is until much later. Lying in bed, listening to the crackle of hearth fire and distant laughter. How did this happen? When did the line between us and them turn into a blur of oatcakes and goat ledgers? You remember the way your grandfather used to talk about the old wars, clear enemies, proud victories, heroic speeches made in the rain. And now your neighbor is named Thorkel and has very strong opinions about leek soup. Historians still argue whether the Danes who stayed became English, or whether English simply shifted under everyone's feet while they weren't looking. You suspect the answer is both. Because these days you say egg instead of egg. You wear a cloak fastened with a brooch shaped like a serpent. You know at least 3 Norse drinking songs. You still hate their loud snoring, but you've learned to sleep through it. The village is quieter now, or maybe just calmer. There are still arguments, mostly about fences and spoons, but no one sharpens weapons under moonlight anymore, not unless it's for a festival. You walk past the old hedgerow and remember that first day, the horns, the fear, the urgent whispers about doom and stolen spoons. Now, a Viking child runs past you barefoot, yelling something about bees and destiny. You smile a little. You may never quite understand the Vikings, but you've gotten used to them. And maybe, just maybe, they've gotten used to you too. The fire has burned low now, and the village is soft with sleep. Somewhere a dog barks once, then curls up again. The longship rests by the river, its hull creaking gently, more decoration than threat. A ribbon tied to its prow flutters in the wind. Someone's child, probably, or a wedding, or both. Inside your cottage, the air is warm, thick with the smell of old wood herbs and comfort. The world outside is quiet. Even the goats have stopped complaining. You lie beneath your wool blanket and close your eyes. All around you, the sounds of a new strange peace settle into place, the mingled snores of old enemies, the creak of shared doors, the rustle of foreign clothes drying by the hearth. You are not quite sure when things changed, but they did. And now, in the stillness of night, with nothing urgent to fear, you let your mind wander softly, slowly through a world of braided beards, borrowed spoons, and warm oatcakes handed to you with a nod and a grunt. Not quite friends. Not quite foes, just neighbors. And as your breath slows and the stars slide overhead, you think maybe that's enough. Maybe that's exactly how history drifts from noise into sleep. Gentlefolk of the internet. Welcome to tonight's historical non-adventure. Tonight we drift slowly and soggily into a time when every unexpected rainfall was blamed not on clouds or condensation, but on enormous giants in the sky shedding tears of sheer sorrow over very bad poetry. Not just mildly disappointing poetry. Not just a questionable limerick or two. No, these were verses so tragic in rhyme, so offensive in meter that thunderheads gathered purely out of grief. You sit now in a misty valley, your cloak damp at the shoulders, the scent of wet earth curling upward in quiet spirals. Around you, the villagers whisper. One elderly woman shakes her head gravely as she folds her arms and mutters, "Another one's been reading verse aloud again." A boy holding a lute sobs softly, not because his instrument is ruined, but because it was his haiku that doomed the barley fields. You probably won't survive this. Not because of the rain, of course. You'll probably be fine in that department, but you're about to hear some of the worst poetry ever allegedly written. And if history is to be believed, it made the clouds themselves weep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere particularly rainy or suspiciously dry, drop your location and local time in the comments. We're building a worldwide map of sleepiness, one soggy bedtime story at a time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year, somewhere between memory and myth. You're not entirely sure whether this is early Bronze Age or post-lunch hallucination, but here you are trudging through a place the locals call the Valley of the Morning Skies. A cluster of sod-roofed huts surrounds you, their thatch leaking slightly, never enough to cause real damage, just enough to remind you the giants are displeased. The people here don't fear the clouds, they fear the poets. There's an ancient belief whispered around smoky hearths carved into tree trunks and embroidered into ceremonial pillowcases: bad poetry makes the giants cry. Not metaphorically, literally. They say the sky giants, enormous sensitive beings lounging in the firmament, are lovers of all things lyrical. But should a poem be clumsy, should a rhyme be forced, or a stanza drag, they begin to sob. Their tears fall as rain, sometimes gently, sometimes in furious sheets. You pass a sign near the well. It reads, "Please refrain from improvised verse within 200 paces, last offender was smited." Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from early proto-meteorological attempts to explain seasonal rainfall, or whether it was simply an elaborate village excuse to silence that one guy who never learned to scan a line properly. But one thing's clear across several folk traditions in Northern Europe: there are traces of sky beings reacting emotionally to human behavior, especially creative behavior. Giants in this worldview are not thunder-wielding warlords. They are emotional, delicate creatures with a deep appreciation for literary cadence. One fringe theory, found scribbled in the margins of a 9th century Icelandic saga, claims the giants once sent down a single verse of their own, etched in frost across a frozen lake. It read, "If thy meter faileth true, then clouds shall speak our skies of blue. But shouldst thy couplet stumble fall, prepare thy fields for rain and squall." Not exactly Shakespeare, but for giants, it was a heartfelt warning. You settle near a fire where a group of villagers huddles around a parchment. It's singed at the corners, damp in the middle, and written in a slanted, overconfident hand. The author, young Edgar, barely 15, believed himself a prodigy. "Shall I compare thee to a goatish pie?" someone reads aloud. Struggling. "Thou art more crusty, yet less edible." You flinch. A low rumble sounds in the distance. The villagers groan in unison. One smacks Edgar gently with a ladle. "You fool. You used a food metaphor in a love poem." Edgar opens his mouth to protest, but it's too late. A cold wind rustles the reeds. The first drop splashes down. You tilt your face to the sky. The clouds, dark and heavy, look just the slightest bit heartbroken. Somewhere above them, if legend is to be trusted, a giant clutches a massive embroidered handkerchief and sobs gently into the void. Mainstream scholars confirm that early agrarian societies often linked rain with divine emotion. In some Mesopotamian texts, rain was the result of gods relieving pressure. A polite euphemism perhaps, but a wet one. In others, rain was literally divine spit. But nowhere else quite captures the idea of rain as critical feedback the way this village does. You glance to your left where a grizzled man holds a scroll tied with twine and says he's working on a free verse epic about potatoes. The others hiss at him, crossing themselves in frantic gestures. He shrugs. It's experimental. You decide wisely to move away. Quirky as it sounds, the villagers' belief system is highly structured. Rain is categorized. Soft drizzle suggests a gentle sigh from the giants, maybe a misused metaphor. Heavy downpour. Likely a limerick gone wrong. Hail, which no one dares speak of. A sonnet that used the word moist unironically. A tiny girl approaches you solemn. She hands you a leaf with a short rhyme scratched in charcoal: "Sky above." Please don't be mad. My rhyme is weak, but I'm not bad. You nod gravely. It's a start. There's comfort oddly enough in this worldview. Your mistakes are washed away quite literally. A bad line doesn't mean you're cursed. It means the sky cares enough to weep, to mourn your literary blunders, and perhaps in time to water your barley. You curl into the soft moss by your hut. The rain patters gently against the eaves. Somewhere high above, a giant reads a tattered scroll and sighs deeply. You wake to the smell of moss and regret. Rain has passed, but the valley still holds a sleepy sort of dampness, like a wet towel reluctantly flung over the world. Villagers tiptoe about in their morning routines, wary of further poetic provocation. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows off-key, unfortunately, and an old man mutters, "Don't let the giants hear that." Today, your task is simple and profoundly strange. You must climb toward the echoing peak, a sacred mountain said to hold the power of divine literary critique. It is not marked on maps because it moves, or more likely the cartographers were just very tired of being rained on. As you set out the path, winds between stony ridges and groves of crooked trees. Birds chirp overhead. One sounds like it's trying to beatbox but only knows 3 syllables. You clutch a small parchment in your cloak, a short poem you wrote last night, just 5 lines long. You told no one. You're hoping the mountain doesn't find out. Locals believe that if you read a poem aloud on echoing peak, the mountain itself will respond. Not with words, of course, but with sound. If the echo is soft and melodic, your work is pleasing. If it stutters, crashes, or returns in the voice of your ex, you're in trouble. And if there's no echo at all, well, then the giants are already crying. Historians still argue whether these beliefs stemmed from actual geological acoustics or from elaborate communal theater. But it's clear that across several ancient European traditions, elevated places were seen as poetic testing grounds, literal high stakes for high verse. Druids may have chanted there. Bards may have battled in spontaneous rain-offs where whoever made the other guy's recitation trigger a drizzle lost. The loser was sometimes dunked in a barrel, the winner mildly smug and slightly drier. As you ascend, the air thins. The earth feels solemn under your feet. A moss-covered stone bears a carving, "Let thy stanzas be structured, lest thou be drenched." A second line has been hastily added in smaller script, "No rhyming love with dove again." Halfway up, you encounter a bard in exile. She wears a patchwork cloak of soggy wool and looks at you with the weary eyes of someone who once tried to rhyme desire with quagmire. She's boiling mushrooms in a cracked pot. When you ask what she's doing here, she says flatly, "Learning to be silent." You press on. The summit appears without fanfare. A circle of ancient stones surrounds a windswept platform, and in the center stands the echo stone, smooth black, taller than you, humming softly like a sleeping animal. Birds avoid this place. So do insects. You, however, are curious or foolish. Often the same thing, really. You approach, unfold your parchment, and recite in a cautious whisper. The sky weeps not for sorrow's sake, but for the rhymes that hearts mistake. If lines do limp and verses crawl, they echo not, but start to fall. Forgive me, sky, I'm doing my best. Silence. Then the echo returns, but it sounds like someone clearing their throat in disappointment. You step back. A single drop of water lands on your nose. Not rain, not yet, but something's listening. A fringe detail from local myth claims the echo stone was once part of a sky giant's molar, dropped during a sneeze and fused to the mountain by divine shame. Whether or not this is true, the villagers take it seriously. Each year they send their bravest poet or most irritating cousin to the summit with fresh verse, hoping to win the giant's approval and keep the valley dry for harvest. You see remnants of these rituals now burned, parchment prayer stones, a half-eaten sandwich that may or may not have been part of an offering. Some poems are carved directly into the rock, weather-worn lines like, "O mighty sky whose clouds do roam. Please take this rhyme and head back home." And another in much shakier hand, "I met a man from north of here. His poems made the goats disappear." It's unclear if that one was meant as praise or warning. The sky above darkens slightly. The wind shifts. You sit beside the echo stone and watch the horizon. The idea that weather could be influenced by aesthetics feels strange in your world, but here it makes a certain kind of sense. These people don't fear nature. They respect its opinion. They treat rain like feedback. Sure, it ruins their shoes and occasionally floods the bakery, but it also makes them try harder, write better, rhyme smarter, and sometimes they say the giants smile. When a truly beautiful poem is spoken something delicate and sincere, the sky clears, the sun returns, the clouds part like curtains at a play. One mainstream Norse tale even mentions cloud-parting praise songs, usually performed after successful goat thefts or weddings, which suggests that poetry wasn't always a rain risk. It could also be a tool of balance of reward. You wonder if that could happen for you. You stand again. This time, no parchment, just voice. Dear giants, you say softly if you are crying, let it be for something lovely. No echo. But the sun peeks through for just a moment. Then a bird poops on your shoulder. Balance, it seems, is restored. You begin your descent. Footsteps slow, mind hazy with the sound of soft wind and distant echoes that may not all be yours. A goat watches from a nearby cliff, judging your posture. You bow to it just in case. Down in the valley, the clouds are holding still, for now. You return to the village just in time to witness what might be the world's most nervous poetry recital. A small crowd has gathered beneath the wide-spreading limbs of the sacred cloud tree, a venerable old thing, with bark like wrinkled hands and leaves that seem to shimmer in tones of dull silver. It's not the kind of tree that gives shade. It gives warnings. They say the cloud tree marks the center of the giant's attention, an antenna of sorts transmitting verse directly to the sky. Whether it's a tree, a relic, or a very tall leafy eavesdropper is still up for debate, but no one dares read a poem within 20 paces of it unless they've made peace with wet socks. Today, however, someone must. It's part of the old rites called the drizzle trials, a quaint name for a ceremony that has caused at least 3 crop failures and 1 emotionally unstable goose. The chosen poet this season is a man named Tobin. He's short earnest and currently sweating so much he's basically pre-moistening the ground in case the rain doesn't show up. Tobin was not selected for his verse, but because he lost a bet involving fermented radishes and an overconfident pun. He stands now before the cloud tree holding a tightly furled scroll as though it might bite him. You watch from the crowd shoulder to shoulder with villagers muttering hopeful phrases like, "Maybe it'll just drizzle," or "I brought an umbrella made of eel skins." Tobin clears his throat. Silence falls. And then, trembling, he begins. "Upon this tree, so wide, so high, I cast my words into the sky. May giants hear and gently weep, or better yet, just fall asleep." The last line causes a stir. A woman gasps. A child hides behind a goat. Someone throws a pebble not at Tobin but skyward, as if trying to divert the attention of divine critics. You feel it before you see it, a gust of wind that smells faintly of wet bark and disappointment. A branch on the cloud tree shivers. The leaves tremble, not all, but just the topmost, like the scalp of someone who's just heard a bad pickup line. And then, a single raindrop, followed by 3, followed by nothing. The sky holds its breath. Tobin bows deeply and scuttles off the ceremonial stone circle. The crowd exhales cautiously pleased. A few drops. That's barely a reprimand. Maybe the giants were distracted. Maybe the poem was against all odds acceptable. Historians still argue whether such public rituals were rooted in pre-Christian weather rites, or whether they developed as part of a performative village justice system, like ancient community theater with higher humidity. Either way, they served a purpose, reinforcing that poetry, for better or worse, mattered, not just emotionally, but agriculturally. The cloud tree itself remains something of an enigma. Modern scholars suspect it's a particularly resilient species of ash tree known to attract certain patterns of condensation. Fringe theorists, however, claim it's the petrified toe of a sky giant who once tried to dance and stepped too low. One man even insists it hums a melody during full moons, but only if the air pressure is right and you've had at least 1 cider. As the villagers begin to disperse, relieved, a young girl tiptoes forward and tucks a folded paper into a hollow in the tree's trunk. You catch the last lines as it flutters. "If tears must fall, let them be kind. I write not well, but I write with mind, a quiet offering. No rain follows." Later that day, you're invited to the village's poet's recovery feast, a thinly veiled excuse to feed Tobin and keep him from writing anything else for the next several weeks. He sits at the end of a long wooden table, looking dazed and vaguely heroic. Someone brings him a loaf of bread shaped like a scroll. He tries to bite into it sideways. The conversation turns, as it often does, to the old legends, sky giants scribbling notes in the stars, rainstorms, as literary critiques the tale of the traveling ballad that caused an entire year of drizzle because someone used the word flibbertigibbet incorrectly. You're told of a lost epic, the Ode of the Eastern Giant, supposedly so beautiful that it caused a week of drought, not out of anger, but because the giants were too enchanted to cry. The village nearly starved. A cautionary tale, it seems, about getting too good at verse. You ask if anyone ever writes intentionally bad poems to bring rain during dry spells. A hush falls, then a chuckle. Oh, we've tried, someone says, but you have to believe it's good. That's the trick. Giants don't fall for satire. A woman in the corner nods wisely. They sense irony. Like dogs sense fear. It's a strangely moving belief, the idea that the sky only weeps when it's disappointed, that somewhere up there, titanic beings are emotionally invested in your syllables, that your art, no matter how clumsy, matters enough to shift the weather. Before night falls, you take a walk past the cloud tree one more time. It stands unmoving, as it always does, its bark still dry. You whisper, "If ever verse could calm the sky, let now be still, and spirits high." No answer, just a soft wind in the branches and the rustle of something larger listening. By the time morning fog pulls back from the treetops, you're already halfway up a narrow ridge behind the valley, because today you're going somewhere few are allowed to go, the Council Hollow. It's not on any maps, no one points to it. In fact, most pretend it doesn't exist, especially when tourists come sniffing around. But villagers speak of it in whispers, a cavern where giants, or at least their echoes, gather to argue, not to shout or bellow, but to engage in intellectual debates so emotionally fraught they often end in light rainfall. You duck beneath a low branch and squeeze into the narrow opening of a cave. It smells of lichen, wet clay, and ink. The walls pulse with moisture, but they're also covered in etchings, long spirals of undecipherable glyphs, sprawling stanzas and symbols that might be musical notes or doodles of clouds wearing monocles. Someone was trying to communicate something here, possibly something poetic, possibly something unhinged. At the center of the cave is a strange semicircle of large smooth stones. They look like seats, though no human rear would fit them comfortably unless it had the proportions of a barge. The tallest stone bears a groove as if worn by something leaning over it in thought. This, the locals claim, is where the sky giant scholars once met. Not all giants, they believe, are prone to weeping. Some are critics, detached, pedantic, the kind of sky giant who writes margin notes and mutters, "Well, technically that's a slant rhyme. These giants aren't the weepers, they're the thinkers. And they're deeply divided on one fundamental issue. Is it the poetry that makes them cry, or the poets?" You settle onto a nearby rock and listen, nothing but dripping water and the occasional echo of your own breath. But according to legend, if you sit long enough and think poetically, you'll hear their arguments faintly like thunder arguing with itself. One side, the literalists, believe that certain syllabic combinations trigger emotional responses regardless of intent. Rain, they argue, is the price of poor structure. According to one fringe tale, a literalist once cried for 13 hours after someone rhymed soul with bowl in a tragic elegy about soup. The other side, the subjectivists, insist that intention matters. A poem written with sincerity, no matter how awkward, is less likely to provoke tears. They believe it's not about technique, it's about the beating heart beneath the ink, or quill, or goose feather depending on availability. Historians still argue whether these personified philosophies reflect actual folklore or whether the villagers were projecting their own artistic anxieties onto imaginary beings. But evidence of this strange scholarly debate shows up all over the region in stone carvings, chant-like songs, even ceremonial masks shaped like frowning clouds. One particularly compelling artifact is a scroll found in a collapsed barn labeled "Minutes of the Giant Council Meeting Year of the Slightly Damp Turnip." It reads in part, "Subject rhyming fire with desire again. Result council deadlocked. Literalists weep. Subjectivists make tea. You pace the hollow and imagine the debates, the booming voices, the thunderous sighs. One scholar tossing a lightning bolt across the room just to make a point. Another pacing furiously mumbling about enjambment, and then unexpectedly you hear a sound. It's not thunder, it's not dripping water, it's humming. You follow the sound and find a narrow passage branching off the main hollow. It opens into a smaller chamber where a mural is painted in shades of ash and ochre. It shows a sky full of eyes, giant eyes watching a man hunched over a scroll. The man is crying, but above him the clouds are smiling. Beneath the mural, a short line in old vernacular reads, "He thought they mourned, but they were moved." You stare at it for a long while. The implications are strange, even comforting. Perhaps the rain isn't judgment. Perhaps it's appreciation too large to express any other way. A giant tear of recognition, of feeling seen. You sit there longer than you meant to. The air is thick but not heavy. The silence almost encouraging. You remember the murmurs from the village feast, the idea that the giants don't hate poetry. They just care too much. They can't help it. A bad line breaks their hearts. A sincere line cracks them wide open. On your way out of the hollow, you notice someone has left a quill and a blank scroll tucked into the cave wall. A gentle prompt, an invitation. You pause. Think of your walk of the damp valley, of Tobin's trembling voice, of the little girl's note tucked in the cloud tree. And you write, "If giants cry, let it be so that words may fall like melted snow. Not pain, but presence in the rain, a sky that listens, a heart in strain." You wait, nothing falls, no echo stirs. But far above the clouds shift slightly, almost like someone nodding. Back in the valley, word has spread, a poet has been heard at the council hollow. No one knows it was you exactly, though a goat has been giving you knowing looks. Still, your scroll has been found, and villagers are now debating whether your rhyme was blessedly balanced or suspiciously metaphorical. That's a real category here. The baker claims that if you use more than 2 metaphors in a stanza, it's basically cloud baiting. But poetry isn't the only tool for managing the weather. As dusk settles in, you meet a woman named Elda. She lives at the edge of the village in a hut with 3 roofs and no doors. She's a weather witch, a respected but mildly feared figure, known for her cloudy teacups and goat-shaped incense burners. Her specialty: reverse rain rituals, ways to stop downpours before they start. Today she's brewing something called metaphor mufflers, a kind of poetic decoy designed to redirect sky giant emotions. The trick, she says, sprinkling fennel seeds into a bubbling pot, is to give the giants just enough to cry about, but not too much. She pulls out a scroll and unrolls it gently. It reads, "Sky giant up above, don't weep." This rhyme is shallow, not too deep. No longing here, no aching sighs, just goats and toast and butterflies. You blink. That's harmless. Exactly. She grins, mediocre enough to avoid heartbreak, mildly charming, a solid 3 out of 10. Historians still argue whether figures like Elda were based on actual ritual leaders or were fictional scapegoats for inconvenient droughts. But in oral traditions across Europe and the Caucasus, there are plenty of stories about cunning women using verse objects and poetry jars to manipulate weather. In one particularly strange tale from southern Albania, villagers reportedly strung wet socks in trees to distract the sky during poetry season. Elda has her own strategy: decoy verse goat harmonics and something called the poetry tax. She explains this with a straight face. "Every spring," she says, "I collect 1 poem from every household. If it's bad, I burn it. If it's good, I bury it. If it's too good, I make them read it to the goats first." Why goats? She sighs as if you've missed the obvious, because goats don't lie, and indeed the goats, several of whom are lounging in her yard like judges on a cloud-based talent show, do seem unnervingly perceptive. One raises its head when you recite a line from memory. Another bleats disapprovingly when Elda accidentally rhymes heart with fart. She waves it off. "Wasn't for you, darling." She takes you to her backyard where a peculiar garden grows. Instead of flowers, it's filled with objects tied to trees. Cracked ink pots, burnt quills, melted candles, and dozens of paper scraps fluttering in the breeze like prayer flags. This, she tells you, is the garden of almost poems, an archive of verse deemed too dangerous to recite or too beautiful to risk being heard by clouds. One reads, My love is like a silent moon, soft and still yet gone too soon. You look up. The sky thankfully remains clear. Elda grins. Burying it under the potato patch helped. You ask if the giants ever respond directly. She hesitates. Only once she says and leads you to a strange object wrapped in muslin. She unwraps it to reveal a single smooth stone about the size of a melon. On it is carved deep, precise, and not in any local hand the phrase, "Try again." Shorter this time. "It fell from the sky," she whispers. Right after the miller's son read that epic about onions and love. You nod slowly. Still, Elda's not the only one in town with weather prevention schemes. There's a cobbler who claims rubbing your shoes with beetroot ink confuses the clouds. A child who insists you can whisper your poems into a mushroom. One man simply shouts haikus into a well and hopes no one notices. But the most elaborate system remains Elda's. Each evening she releases her safety verse into the wind carried by kites made of old laundry. You help her tonight. The wind is mild, the lines unremarkable, and as the final stanza flutters skyward, no aching hearts, no longing rain, just sleepy skies and fields of grain. You both wait. No thunder, just a gentle breeze. She hands you a biscuit shaped like a cloud. "Not bad," she says. "You're halfway to being harmless." There's something sweet and deeply human about all of it. This attempt to soothe the sky, to anticipate the feelings of something immense and invisible. To believe your little words might cause a giant to cry or smile. You sit on the hillside that evening, watching the kites vanish into the dark. Somewhere you think there's a giant laughing softly, or maybe wiping away a very small tear. It rains the next morning. Not a torrential flood, not a furious downpour, but one of those quiet, melancholic drizzles that seems to come from somewhere emotionally complicated. You step out into it, hood pulled up, and look around. No one seems surprised, because last night under the old stone bridge, someone found a scroll, a long one, unmarked, anonymously written. And according to Elda, who stayed up far too late reading it, it was beautiful, too beautiful. She sighs when she tells you. It was honest. It rhymed soul with coal and somehow made it work. Then she holds up a boot. It's damp. The giants didn't stand a chance. You walk through the village watching people carry buckets to catch the water. Not out of panic, out of ritual. Every poem-provoked rainfall must be honored. The water is considered blessedly bruised tender with feeling. They'll use it to wash fabrics, to steep tea, to cook the next harvest's first stew. No one knows who wrote the scroll. It wasn't Tobin. He's been banned from quills since Tuesday. Elda's too careful, and the goats haven't raised any suspicious eyebrows, so you wander wondering. That's when you find the scroll. Not the scroll, but a different one. Wedged into a hollow near the cloud tree, ink running just slightly from the rain. You tug it free and read, heart sinking a little at each line. Let skies above be free to feel, for words when true can break and heal. We speak, we write, we cry, we mend, and giants too have hearts to lend. It's good, really good, quiet, unforced. The kind of poem that doesn't demand tears but gently earns them. You feel one threaten your eye and blink it away before the sky notices. You fold the scroll and tuck it into your cloak. Historians still argue whether poems like these ever really moved weather, or whether the myth was simply a way for communities to express the sacred weight of words. But even the skeptics can't deny the cultural pattern. Seasonal reading bans special rainy day songs to appease the SOG ceremonial umbrellas, carved with couplets. Words mattered here. Words still do. Later that day, you find yourself at the village's modest library, a round building with a leaky roof and shelves bowed by humidity. You're not alone. A boy in a moss-colored tunic is reciting something under his breath, one syllable at a time. Stars, scars, jars. He groans. Too many R's. The giants will hate it. You help him rework the line. He replaces jars with doors and sighs with relief. It doesn't rhyme, but it no longer sounds like a sneeze. You sit with him a while, watching villagers come and go, slipping poems into baskets. One scroll is clearly a joke, rhyming clouds with crowds and ending with mushroom soup. Another is heartbreakingly earnest, a 5-line piece about missing a father lost in a storm. You realize then the rain isn't about punishment, it's about witness. The sky giants, imagined or not, are stand-ins for something larger, an audience beyond ourselves. A reminder that words echo, that feelings can fall, that even when no one seems to be listening, something out there responds. And maybe the sky cries not because the poems are bad. Maybe it cries because they're real. At sunset, the rain stops. The village gathers one last time at the cloud tree. No one speaks. Instead, they sit quietly, eyes closed, listening to the leaves dry. And just as the first star appears, someone begins to hum a soft tune with no words at all. The melody rises, hesitates, loops again. No lyrics, no metaphors, no risk, just feeling. You drift off sometime during the third round. The scroll in your cloak is warm. Now, as the clouds retreat and the valley settles into a gentle hush, you lie back on the mossy slope behind the cloud tree, eyes half closed, fingers tracing the edges of forgotten parchment. The wind softens, leaves sway without urgency. Somewhere nearby, a goat sighs. Above you, the sky is calm again, not blank but full, not judgmental but present. If there are giants watching, they are quiet now, drying their cheeks on star-strewn sleeves. You listen to the hush between breaths, the pause between raindrops, the space where poetry lingers after the voice has gone still. It's in that space you feel safest. Your limbs grow heavy, your thoughts gentler. Each passing minute wraps you in quieter language, sentences stretched into yawns, metaphors softened into wool. No need to recite, to compose, to revise. Here, the only verse that matters is the slow, steady rhythm of your breath. Tonight, there are no trials, no scrolls to decipher, no skies to decipher them. Just silence and the fading memory of a world where giants cried for reasons that still make perfect sense. And even if they never did, the story was worth it anyway. Sleep now. The rain is past, the sky is listening, and it understands. Gentle folk of the internet, welcome to tonight's historical non-adventure. Tonight we drift into the richly textured, mildly pungent, and occasionally mold-speckled world of a job you've likely never aspired to, yet somehow you now can't stop thinking about. Tonight we follow the noble, sniffing footsteps of a 14th century cheese inspector. You find yourself in a narrow, timber-framed village somewhere in late medieval Europe. It's still dark out. Not brooding, candlelit, romantic dark, no, the kind of cold pre-dawn gloom where your nose turns red and your boots squelch in mud you sincerely hope is only mud. A rooster begins its wheezy crow like it's on its third career. Somewhere nearby, a cow coughs ominously. The village smells faintly of firewood, wool, and a kind of sharp dairy tang that suggests something fermented, legal, and possibly alive. Your job: to ensure that no cheese, no matter how noble, aged, or cleverly disguised, slips through the cracks of civic order. You are officially the sworn inspector of curds, and if that sounds glamorous, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what's your local time? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the frost-crusted cobblestones of the village square. The air is quiet save for the soft clink of your official cheese gauge swinging at your hip. It looks a bit like a thin dagger but dull used for sampling the interior of cheese wheels, like a small, edible sword in the stone test. Your other tools include an iron branding stamp, an official wax seal, a scroll of cheese ordinances, and a rather fetching wool cloak that smells faintly of old sheep. The dairy hall is already open. Large, round wheels of cheese sit on wooden racks like patient yellow sentinels. The village cheesemakers, mostly women with sleeves rolled up and stern expressions, are waiting for you with the air of people who've been up since midnight and don't want to hear your opinion unless it's perfect. One of them nods curtly. "Inspector," she mutters. Her name is Brita. She makes a famously spicy hard cheese using wild garlic and something she won't name. You once asked? She just laughed. You begin with the ritual, yes, an actual ritual of oath swearing. Not for you, you've already sworn your inspector's code in front of the mayor and 3 deeply uninterested goats. No, It's the cheesemakers who must swear they haven't tampered with weights, used foreign milk, or sung any cursed songs to the curds during fermentation. This last part isn't a joke. Some towns banned lullabies near dairy vats, believing melodies could sour milk. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, a labor control tactic, or just someone really hated their neighbors singing. You start with a round from Brida's stall. She hands you her best, a firm, knobbly wheel smelling like onion and damp cellar. You drive your cheese gauge deep into its center and withdraw a small plug. You examine the interior, texture smooth but not rubbery, color uniform, scent piquant with a hint of aggression. You nod. She exhales. One down, dozens to go. Your inspection process is methodical. Each cheese must be measured, weighed, poked, and occasionally licked. You do not enjoy this part, but it is part of the code. If you declare a cheese worthy, you stamp it with the iron seal of the town. It's shaped like a stylized cow's head and hisses gently when pressed against a warm rind. As the sun begins to rise, villagers arrive with baskets. They want to buy breakfast cheese. You are expected to hover ominously nearby, ensuring no unmarked or suspiciously damp wheel is sold. Occasionally, you make polite conversation with the children, who find you fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. One little boy whispers, "Is it true you can smell lies?" You consider telling him yes, but instead say, "Only if the lie smells like cheap butter." He runs. There is a reason this role exists. In the 14th century, food fraud was a real issue. Merchants might sell cheese made with too much salt, too little milk, or even questionable rennet sources like a dried pig's stomach instead of calf. A bad cheese could spoil a fair or make travelers sick. Worse, it could damage a town's reputation. No one wants to be known as that place with the exploding camembert. One odd theory still debated by scholars is whether inspectors sometimes doubled as tasters for noble households, ensuring cheeses weren't poisoned. Some old letters hint at this, but others say cheese inspectors were rarely trusted with anything except dairy and dramatic size. Around mid-morning, a farmer arrives late with a suspiciously shiny cheese. You eye it, you prod it. It wobbles like a guilty jelly. The farmer insists it's just been polished with beeswax. You raise an eyebrow. Beeswax is legal, if declared. You check the wax scroll. Page 3. Subsection B. Beeswax must be natural, unscented, and applied with a wooden cloth, not sheep's wool. You hand down your verdict: 2 hours in the stocks for misrepresentation of surface coating. The farmer groans. The villagers nod solemnly. Justice must be served even if it smells faintly of lavender wax. Back in the hall, someone offers you a slice of bread with cheese. This is a test. You accept, but only a bite. Too eager, and it's a bribe. Too cold, and they'll think you're bitter. The slice is good. You nod. They smile. A delicate, edible diplomacy. Just outside the hall, a traveling minstrel sings a song about a brave cheese inspector who saved a town from a cursed wheel. It ends with the line, "He sniffed, he stabbed, and justice was served on rye." You pretend not to be flattered, but you are. You step outside the dairy hall, the morning sun now climbing above the patchy thatch roofs. The warmth hasn't reached the ground yet, so your boots still crunch over frost. The day's next duty isn't glamorous. There's a suspected underground cheese operation in the East Quarter, and you've been summoned. You sigh. East Quarter cheese means trouble. Not because it's criminally bad, on the contrary, it's delicious. But it's unregulated, untaxed, and often aged in abandoned wells or under floorboards, which is frowned upon by the Guild of Official Market Dairy Products. Yes, it exists, and yes, its logo is a goat with a monocle. You make your way down a narrow alley between two sagging inns. The smell of onions and old beer drifts from an open window. Somewhere above you, a cat yowls. You knock on a wooden door that looks like it hasn't opened legally in years. A small hatch slides open, revealing suspicious eyes. "Password," the voice says. You sigh. Stilton walks at dawn. The door creaks open. Inside, it's dim and cramped. Shelves of small, irregular wheels line the walls. A woman named Gertrude nods at you from behind a table. She's wearing a smock stained with whey and determination. Gertrude is not a criminal, she insists. She's a fermentarian anarchist. You've heard worse. You raise your cheese gauge but pause. This is one of those moral moments. You could shut her down. The town would be grateful. But it's also true her cheeses cure faster, spoil less. And this is awkward, are better than the official stalls. Still, she's breaking ordinances. You take a sample, inspect it under the sliver of light. There's a faint swirl of blue in the center. Penicillium, she whispers, as if naming a child. You nod slowly. Mold can be legal depending on the town. In some regions they celebrate it. Others call it the devil's bloom. Historians still argue whether blue mold cheeses were revered, feared, or both. One friar's diary from 1367 claims a wheel of blue cheese whispered to him. Another simply says, "Ate blue lump. Saw angels. You chew, think, and make a decision. You mark the cheese with a small chalk X, technically not a stamp, but close enough to keep your conscience in check." Gertrude winks. You pretend not to notice. As you step outside, you're greeted by a boy running toward you, waving a parchment. It's a summons. The town bailiff wants a ruling on a cheese dispute between two monasteries. You groan. Monastic cheese feuds are the worst. They go on for decades and involve passive-aggressive letters written in Latin and occasionally sabotage. You hitch a ride in the back of a cart heading toward the priory. The driver, a cheerful older man named Tom, offers you a strip of dried apple. "You cheese folk don't get much rest, eh?" he chuckles. "Only on days with no moon," you reply automatically. Tom blinks. "Joking," you add, "mostly." The monastery looms ahead, squat and gray, with a bell tower like a watching eye. You're ushered into a chamber where two monks are glaring at each other across a table. On the table, two nearly identical wheels of semi-soft cheese, both wrapped in cloth and smug self-righteousness. Brother Anselm claims his cheese is the older recipe handed down from St. Clotilda herself. Brother Hugo says his wheel uses only milk from cows who have heard Gregorian chant, which improves texture. You don't ask how. You've learned not to. You examine both wheels. One has a better rind, the other a smoother interior. You slice into each with practiced grace. Both smell excellent like butter and faint monastery soap. You take a bite from each slowly. You pause, stare into the distance and say softly, "One is confident, the other is kind." They stare at you like you've spoken in tongues. Eventually you declare a draw. Both wheels are acceptable for market, but must be labeled as Abbey cheese, north, and Abbey cheese to south. The monks grumble but agree. You leave quickly before someone drafts a hymn about it. As you return to town, a group of children is playing a game involving cheese wheels and sticks. You pause to watch. It's called Chase the Cheese, and the rules seem unclear, except that whoever gets hit with the rolling wheel is blessed and must sing a song. A small girl rolls a wheel directly at your feet. You catch it instinctively. "Oh no," she gasps, "you're blessed." The children gather, eyes wide. "I suppose I must sing," you say solemnly. And you do. One verse of a ridiculous inspector's rhyme involving mold and justice. The children cheer. Your dignity shrinks, but your reputation soars. By early afternoon, the mayor's clerk finds you. They want you at the fairground. A nobleman brought foreign cheese without a license. You nod. Of course he did. At the fair, a small crowd has gathered around a well-dressed man, gesturing angrily over an enormous wedge of something orange and slightly sweaty. "It is a gift from the Duke of Bourgogne," he cries. You raise an eyebrow. The cheese in question has a powerful scent like burnt garlic and old leather boots. It's exotic, certainly, but also legally questionable. According to statute, foreign cheeses must be declared tasted by the inspector, and this part is often skipped, accompanied by a blessing from the town priest if aged over 3 months. The priest arrives reluctantly. He blesses it with holy water. It sizzles. You sigh. Unclear, you murmur. Could be the herbs. Still, you tap the wedge with your gauge, sniff it deeply, and pronounce it probably safe for human reflection, if not consumption. The nobleman is furious. The crowd applauds. Justice once again smells faintly like regret. Your day refuses to calm down. No sooner have you walked away from the nobleman's heated complaints about your provincial nose than a page from the Guild of Barrel-Aged Goods gallops in, breathless and muddy, clutching a scroll. You take it, unfold it, and scan the ornate but somehow still panicked handwriting. It's from the guild master herself. The royal steward is visiting incognito again, and he's got questions about cheese storage. Of course he does. The steward has made it something of a hobby to test the town's various inspectors without announcing himself. He once disguised himself as a blind tinker, another time as a man selling medicinal cabbage. Both times he asked deeply leading questions about cheese worth dying for. Last time he pretended to faint from a supposedly overripe brie. You're still recovering. You hurry to the guild hall where you find a man in an oversized cloak speaking suspiciously loudly about rind density. It's him. You sigh, approach, and bow, not too deeply, just enough to avoid being accused of sarcasm. My good man, he begins sniffing a chunk of crumbly cheddar the size of a toddler's head. What's your opinion of this specimen's heroic potential? You blink. It could rally a militia but not lead one, you reply smoothly. He narrows his eyes, then breaks into a grin. Very good. Very good indeed. He removes his cloak and reveals a doublet stitched with tiny embroidered cows. You resist the urge to laugh. He inspects your badge and declares to no one in particular, this one's competent. Then, just as abruptly, he leaves. The guildmaster appears from behind a stack of scrolls and sighs with relief. He didn't lick anything this time. That's a win. You nod gravely. As you finally exit the guild hall, you're handed a wedge of soft cheese wrapped in a napkin, your thank you gift. You sniff it, unpasteurized. Of course, the day is far from over, but your stomach suggests a break. You retreat to your usual lunch haunt, a tiny inn by the canal, where the cook old Marta serves hot stew and doesn't ask questions. She places a bowl in front of you and a heel of bread beside it, along with a triangle of something gooey and comforting on the side. Don't ask what it's called, she says. It just showed up one day. You chew thoughtfully. The cheese is dreamy, soft, subtle, with just a whisper of mushroom and hay. This was made in moonlight, you mutter aloud. Marta nods like that explains everything. The canal outside gurgles softly. Geese drift past looking smug. You exhale, finally feeling your pulse slow, but it doesn't last. A merchant storms in, red-faced and panting. Inspector, he barks. There's been a curdling incident at Dock Row. Ah, of course there has. You follow him through the winding streets to Dock Row, where a crate of sheep's milk cheese has exploded. The crowd is being held back by a pair of constables, one of whom is trying not to gag. You step over a trail of creamy wreckage and inspect the carnage. The merchant swears he followed protocol, salt levels balanced, humidity controlled. But you spot the problem almost immediately. He used a foreign wrapping leaf, one banned in 3 counties, and known to react badly with sheep's milk. Where did you get this, you ask? He hesitates. A sailor. Was this sailor missing any fingers? He nods, surprised. You close your eyes. There's only one man it could be, Mad Jacob, the floating cheesemonger of the northern docks. He once tried to invent a cheese that aged only at sea, tied to the tail of a dolphin. Historians still argue whether he was a visionary or simply lonely. You confiscate the remaining wheels and instruct the constables to place them in a quarantine basket lined with sage. Explosive curd is no joke once a wheel launched itself through a bishop's window during Vespers. It is now the subject of a church ballad. Back at your office, you pen a short report with a long title on the inadvisability of leaf-wrapped sheep's cheese in low-tide environments. You stamp it, then place it in the For Archivists to someday regret shelf. You're about to sit when someone taps at your door. It's a young woman holding a wooden box. I found this by the Abbey, she says. It was buzzing. Buzzing cheese isn't always a bad sign. Sometimes it just means the mites are doing their job. But this buzz is different. You open the box and stare. Inside is a tiny wheel covered in golden rind, vibrating gently. You prod it with your gauge, it hums. You sniff, it smells. Ancient. Not spoiled, not foul, just deeply, confusingly wise. There's a note tucked beneath it. No signature. Just 5 words. Do not eat yet. Observe. You glance at the girl. She shrugs. Figured it was your sort of problem. You nod, placing the box gently on your shelf next to the one marked ominous samples. This makes 4. Afternoon begins to fade. Shadows stretch long across your maps. A pigeon lands on your sill, cooing the melody of a drinking song. Somewhere in the distance, someone drops a wheel of something soft and squeaky, and a child laughs. You pour yourself a mug of small beer and sit quietly. It's not glamorous work. You don't wear a sword or give speeches. But you keep the peace between curd and crowd, between monk and merchant, between mystery and milk fat. And sometimes, when you catch just the right scent drifting in on the wind, you can tell what time it is. By cheese alone. You're not even halfway through your mug of small beer when the town bell tolls 3 slow, ominous chimes. Not the fire bell, not the flood bell. No, this one is worse. It's the bell they ring when someone finds an unclaimed cheese. You sigh and rise, already knowing where you'll be needed. The bell only rings like that when the cheese has no provenance, no markings, and most crucially, no paperwork. And as any inspector worth their rind will tell you, an unregistered cheese is more dangerous than a dishonest apothecary or a mayor with ambition. By the time you reach the cathedral courtyard, a curious crowd is gathered. At the center of a ring of gawkers sits the cheese in question, a firm-looking wheel neatly tied in waxed linen sitting atop a pewter dish. Someone, likely the first on the scene, has stuck a small wooden sign in it. It reads, "Do not touch, smells like arsenic." You lean down and take a careful sniff. It doesn't smell like arsenic. It smells like rain on stone cloves and something else, something ancient. You gently prod it with your inspection fork, which immediately vibrates in a way that suggests I'm not paid enough for this. You glance at the bishop, who's fanning himself nervously. Did anyone see who left it? No one. One moment the dish was empty, the next, that. You nod, then examine the base of the pewter plate. There, scratched in nearly invisible script, is a date 1278. The year isn't the strange part. The font is. It's monastic, but one used only by the cheese scribes of the Montbel Monastery, an order famous for their devotional cheeses and their strict silence. The monastery burned down a century ago. All records lost, all cheeses presumed consumed, but this wheel could be a survivor. You explain this quietly to the bishop, who immediately starts making the sign of the wheel over his chest. You confiscate the cheese. It joins the others in your ominous samples shelf, where it hums softly to itself like a lullaby made of butter. Back at your desk, you unroll a scroll from the central archive titled Known Mysteries of Dairy Provenance, Volume 6. You flip past entries on goose cheese, blue cheese that grows its own salt, and a brie that allegedly cured a man's hiccups for life. Finally, you find a passage about the last wheel of Montbel, believed to have been sealed during a thunderstorm, and aged beneath the abbey floor, forgotten until the fire. Historians still argue whether it was ever retrieved, or whether, as some monks claimed, it chose its moment to re-emerge. You sit back, rubbing your temple. You should be resting. But instead, you find yourself summoned again. This time by a furious apprentice baker who insists the cheese she bought this morning has developed opinions. You arrive to find the cheese a mild semi-soft, allegedly wedged into the corner of her pantry, refusing to be sliced. Every time she approaches it with a knife, the blade bends ever so slightly. Not breaks, just bends, as if the cheese is pushing back. You attempt to weigh it. The scales say, "It weighs many regrets." Your cheese gauge reads. You ask the cheese politely if it would mind being removed. It seems to shiver, and then allow itself to be lifted. You cradle it in both hands. It's oddly warm. You thank the baker and return to your lab. You've run out of shelf space, so this one goes in your windowsill next to the plant that smells like mint, but isn't. As the sun sets and the town turns orange with quiet, you prepare the evening ritual, a walk through the open market, not for inspection this time, but for presence. When people see the cheese inspector, they straighten their displays, tidy their wedges, and lower their haggling voices. You stop by a small stall run by an old man who insists he once dated a duchess. He sells only one thing: tiny cheese buttons. You buy a handful, not because you like them, but because he once saved your life by pointing out a mislabeled goat cheese in a royal buffet. You continue walking past the fountain where the geese bathe, past the statue of Saint Lactose, the tolerant patron of fermentation. Children are playing with hoops. A group of students try to guess cheese types by smell alone. Your training method is catching on. And then, just before you turn homeward, you spot a child no more than 8, sitting on a crate holding a cheese wedge in each hand, asking passers-by to pick a side. Which one's nobler, she demands. You crouch beside her and examine the offerings. One is a hard cheese, aged long, with deep crystals and a nutty smell. The other is soft, a bit runny, flecked with herbs. You point to the hard cheese. That one endured more. Makes it humble. She nods solemnly and bites into the other. "I like rebels," she says through a full mouth. You grin and rise, the day finally winding down. Back at your home, you remove your boots with a sigh and light a stubby candle. You open your personal stash, a small, carefully labeled box of cheeses reserved for quiet moments. Tonight you select a wedge of sweet blue wrapped in fig leaves. It crumbles perfectly. You sit by the window watching the lanterns flicker in the streets. You are by all accounts alone. But you are not lonely. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sniffing a wheel suspiciously. Someone else is holding a slice up to the light, squinting at the mold. And someone else somewhere just asked a goat if she's feeling milky. And you know deep down, they'd all call you if things went weird. Because weird is your job. Morning returns as it always does, far too soon and with far too much confidence. The light creeps in through the slats of your shutters, warming the corners of your cheese logbook, glinting off the brass tip of your butter knife stylus. You stretch. Something in your shoulder makes a sound like old wheels turning in brine. Standard. Today's duties begin not in the market square but in the courtyard of comparative odors. It's one of the more obscure town institutions funded by a forgotten clause in the municipal charter and maintained primarily by eccentric apothecaries and cheese theorists. And today, you're hosting a cheese crime tribunal. The matter at hand, a local merchant accused of cross-species forgery, attempting to pass off sheep's cheese as cows. To the untrained eye, this might seem trivial, but to those in the know, this is culinary heresy. The defendant, a plump man with sweat-beaded brows, and extremely guilty eyebrows, stands by his cart as you conduct the first trial by smell. 3 selected jurors, each with 1 working nostril and decades of cheese experience, inhale deeply. 1 weeps slightly. You slice a sample and rub it gently between 2 fingers. The residue is greasy, wrong texture for sheep. Then you taste, and it is deceptive. There's a creaminess on the tongue, yes, but also a hollowness, like a cheese that knows it's lying. You glance at your assistant, who's already produced the scroll of known dairy genealogies. With a few quick measurements and a hastily sketched cheese family tree, it becomes clear this sheep's cheese has a bovine great-grandmother. A scandal. The tribunal votes. Guilty. The punishment. A temporary cheese ban, 3 days in the aromatic stocks, don't ask, and required attendance at a fermentation ethics seminar. With justice served, you return to your office, only to find a parchment folded into the shape of a wedge waiting on your desk. You open it. It's a request from a nearby village with a familiar refrain. The cheeses are singing again. You pack your bag. The village of Dunmare is a quiet place of stone cottages, slow cows, and the kind of wind that carries secrets. As you arrive, the mayor meets you at the gate. His beard is neat, his eyes frantic. They started at dawn, he says, barely above a whisper. Low humming, harmonies. The camemberts are doing descant. You're escorted to the cellar of a local dairy where 3 wheels sit on an oaken shelf, vibrating gently. You listen. Sure enough notes, low E-D sharp and an unsettling minor 6th. You hum along instinctively. No one else hears it, of course. Only inspectors trained in acoustic fermentation can truly perceive cheese music. You make a note of this possible choir formation. Needs salt adjustment. Historians still argue whether early cheesemakers intentionally created musical curds, or whether it was simply a byproduct of wind mold and strong opinions. Either way, this isn't your first singing cheese incident. You isolate the wheels and wrap them in wool for calming. Then you place them in a soundproof chest which you line with lavender wax. Music fades. As thanks, the villagers present you with a gift. A small pale cheese made from the milk of a goat they believe dreams in color. It has a scent like green apples and old secrets. You nod graciously and add it to your satchel. The walk home is uneventful, save for the usual goats blocking the road, and 1 cheese thief who turns out to be a raccoon with excellent taste. You let him keep the rind. Back in town, your assistant meets you with news the royal cheese taster is arriving tomorrow. You groan. Not because you dislike the man, he's actually quite charming, but because his visits mean bureaucracy performance and, worst of all, paper cheese work. The royal cheese taster. Sir Ollivander de Vlies is known for his extravagant tasting rituals. He arrives just after breakfast in a cloak stitched with tiny spoons and insists on beginning with a ceremonial nibble. You present him with your finest, a triple-aged Alpine style with veins like marble and a smell like rain-soaked books. He swoons slightly. Ah, sublime. Then the interrogation begins. Not a view of the cheeses. He holds a wheel to his ear, whispers to it, listens. He taps. He asks, what secrets were hidden in the cave that aged you? Then louder, who was the midwife goat? It's all very dramatic, but he's good at what he does. With 1 sniff, he identifies a mild contamination in a wedge of Havarti you'd been watching. His diagnosis is correct excess dandelion pollen. You mark it for reassessment. After an hour of showy gestures and poetic metaphors, this one tastes like betrayal on a warm spring morning. He declares your town's collection to be in excellent health. He departs with a flourish, leaving behind only a napkin with a limerick on it and a half-eaten wheel of Stilton. You collapse into your chair, and then you hear it. A knock at the door. You open it to find an old woman with a basket holding a cheese so soft it appears to be melting from emotion. She explains she found it growing wild in her garden. You ask, "Did you plant cheese?" She shrugs. "I was growing sage. Maybe it wandered in." You take it, cradle it, examine its edges, and for a moment you're sure it sighs, so you place it beside the others in your quiet room of curious cheeses and you hum a lullaby as you close the door behind you. At some point in the quiet of the night, it starts to rain. Not the dramatic kind with thunder and flash, but a soft, earnest drizzle that turns rooftops into lullabies. You're already awake, of course. Cheese doesn't rest, and neither do you not, when the humidity shifts mid-dream and threatens to unbalance the temperament of the entire cheddar shelf. You pad across the stone floor of your cottage barefoot robe, slightly askew, holding a candle in one hand and a thermometer in the other. In the low light, the cheeses glow faintly with oils drawn to the surface by the change in pressure. This, you think, is the price of vigilance. One cheese, a washed rind wheel named Hildegard, has begun to sweat. You dab her gently with a linen cloth and murmur encouragement. She'll survive the night. You're halfway back to bed when you spotted a shadow where no shadow should be flickering past the cellar window. You squint. Possibly a fox, possibly a thief, possibly just the wind having opinions again. You grab your staff, not a weapon, but the long ceremonial cheese probe used to test internal moisture levels, and step outside. Rain taps the cobblestones, mingling with the scent of basil and old milk. The garden lies peaceful. Except there, near the fence, a shape hunched over a crate, moving. You raise your voice, state your name and dairy intentions. The figure startles. A small voice responds, "I wasn't going to steal it, I just wanted to smell it." You approach cautiously. It's a child, ragged tunic, muddy feet, holding a small wheel of cheese with trembling hands. He looks up at you with guilty eyes. "It's from my mum," he says. "She said it's cursed and I should give it to someone who could tell." You kneel beside him, inspect the cheese. It's a dry, crumbling thing cracked around the edges, but it bears a strange mark pressed into the rind like a stamp. A stylized goat with two tails. You blink. That symbol hasn't been used in decades. The two-tailed goat was a short-lived cheese guild known for experimental methods and occasional chaos. They once tried to ferment cheese by burying it under a yew tree during lunar eclipses. Results were inconsistent. You take the cheese gently, tell your mother she was right to be cautious and brave. He nods, then runs off into the night, sandals flapping. Back inside, you lay the cursed cheese on a shelf lined with rosemary twigs and whisper the standard anti-mischief charm. By curd and whey, stay strange, but stay quiet. Then you finally make tea. The morning after rain is the kind that turns your joints into tiny protest marches. But today is inspection day, not for others, but for you. The town archivist has summoned you to submit your quarterly records, a ritual more dreaded than botulism in Brie. You gather your logbooks, your parchment scrolls of past misdeeds, cheese-related only, and your stack of hand-labeled scent samples. At the hall, the archivist awaits a woman made entirely of starched linen and disappointed sighs. She gestures you toward the inspection desk with the kind of slow, deliberate authority reserved for librarians and medieval tax collectors. You lay out your documents, the cheese census, the mislabeling fines, the cases of mild spiritual possession 1. She reviews each with a magnifying glass and a tiny skeptical frown. Then comes the worst part. The audit, she says. You suppress a groan. This means reciting from memory the entire cheese purity code section, 12 through 33 backwards. A tradition established by someone who definitely hated fun. You oblige slowly as your brain melts. 3 hours later, you are dismissed with a nod. Passable, she says, which is practically a standing ovation in archivist terms. You stumble outside, blinking into the sun. You've survived another audit. To celebrate, you visit the Wayside Inn, where the barkeep offers you a small, glorious wheel of blue cheese as thanks for resolving the recent dancing milkmaid incident. It pairs excellently with sleep. But before you can retreat home, a messenger arrives. He's out of breath, cloak soaked with mud. There's been a breach, he says. At the monastery vault. You blink. The cheese vault. He nods. Now, to be fair, most monasteries don't technically have vaults just for cheese. But this one does. It's been aging a single wheel, a holy Gouda, for 53 years. It is said to contain the flavor of revelation. You arrive before dusk. The monks are distraught. The vault door was tampered with, the sacred Gouda untouched, but moved 3 inches to the left. You examine the scene. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, but a faint smell of rosemary and ink. Your brow furrows. Then you see it, a small scrap of parchment on the floor stamped with the two-tailed goat. Ah, so the guild still stirs. You return the cheese to its rightful spot and place protective herbs around the vault. Whatever the message was, it's been received, and then you go home. Finally, gloriously, you return to your quiet, cluttered room. The fire crackles, the cheeses rest. Even Hildegard is breathing calmly now. You sit. Let the day fall off your shoulders. You are the last line of defense between the world and dairy chaos. You are tired, but also deeply fulfilled. You close your eyes. And now, dear listener, the cheeses are quiet. The rain has passed. The fire burns low, casting long shadows across the worn wooden beams of your little cottage. You can hear the rhythmic ticking of the clock in the hall and the occasional sleepy creak of a wheel shifting ever so slightly on the shelf. Outside, the wind has gone still. The roads are empty, save for the faint echo of a distant cart or the soft hoot of an owl. Your robe is warm, your chair is soft, and for the first time in days, your shoulders begin to truly sink into rest. Your mind gently quiets, no longer parsing pH balances or debating the merits of ash-covered rinds. The parchment stays folded. The ink dries. Tonight there are no trials, no cursed cheeses, no goat-stamped conspiracies or singing camemberts. Just calm. Just cool, comforting air and the soft pulse of a world winding down. And should you dream, let it be of green pastures, slow cows, and the ancient art of cheese tended lovingly by lamplight. You've earned this rest, Inspector. Let the next shift wait until morning.